We've got some very fresh new Lil Durk paperwork, and some people are saying that it's finally looking good for the boy Lil Durk. Now, I've said quite a few times on this channel that I personally think, in my personal, honest, own, personal, just me, not trying to get sued opinion, is that Lil Durk is perhaps cooked. He is perhaps overly cooked. He's perhaps grilled, charbroiled, perhaps. But realistically, a lot of people think that I'm capping. A lot of people think I've got the wrong opinion. That's just my personal opinion. I don't want people to get the wrong idea and think that I'm telling you for a fact 100,000%. If it's not true, if I'm lying, I'm dying. That's just my opinion. A lot of people think that Lil Durk is going to beat this, and one of those people is my guy, Seti Nash. Shout out to Seti Nash. He just posted this new paperwork on his story on Instagram and on his as a post on Instagram, and he believes that he's been saying since the very beginning that Durk is going to go free. Now, I want to be very fair. I want to present you his opinion on this first, and then I'm going to go through the paperwork and explain why I'm not entirely convinced that he is good, but I do feel like this new piece of paperwork is make or break, and we might see things start to go in a positive direction for Durk if, and that's a big, fat, enormous 400-pounder if, the government doesn't clap back in a powerful way. But if the government does clap back in a way that I think they might clap back, it will be over for Lil Durk, and he will be fully cooked like a rotisserie chicken. I'm not going to lie, okay? So there's a lot of nuance to this, and it all comes down to quite literally the last couple of lines of this paperwork. So I'm going to go through the entire thing. I've just read the entire 11-page document. I've made notes on everything. I'm going to break it all down for you. But before we get to that, let's look at what Seti had to say about the situation.
The only person that ain't signed the OTF that been telling y'all from day one Durk finna be found innocent. Take a look. PW1 first claimed that there was no bounty, that he did not commit the murder for money. He did it under duress to magically change his story. They realized what he was saying was cap, probably when the SSI removed the allegation that Didi actually paid the bounty. So here you say right here, if that doubt eliminating discovery existed, the government would certainly have cited to it in its oppression, yet it does not. Indeed, nowhere does the discovery set forth anything resembling a fixed or coherent theory of the time, place, and circumstances of the bounty, allegations, or at the direction of the allegations. On the contrary, the discovery reveals government witnesses who are consistently changing their stories. PW1, for example, has asserted that there was no bounty at all, that he did not agree to murder TB for monetary gain, and that he did so under duress. But as one might expect, in a murder for hire prosecution predicated on the existence of a bounty, he rises to meet the occasion. In one government proffer session, PW1 recounts how Mr. Wilson allegedly stayed behind in Los Angeles after the other participants flew out in order to collect the bounty money for distribution. PW1's story is, however, flatly contradicted by the objective evidence. The government's realization that PW1 lied here is likely why, between the first superseding indictment and the second superseding indictment, it deleted language alleging that Mr. Wilson paid the bounty after SR's homicide. See docket number 27, page 6 at 9, when the government's witnesses are constantly changing their stories about crucial facts as the discovery catalogs here. Mr. Banks' defense must take aim at a moving target that is fundamentally unfair. Yeah, I'm going to drop the full entire thing on my channel, but we're going to do that tomorrow. Let the bloggers have it. I'm always breaking news. Shout out to Durk all day. Shout out to Lil Bro. Do your thing. Crazy shit.
So Seti said, I'm going to let the bloggers have it. I appreciate the alley-oop once again from Seti Nash. I wonder why he's not jumping on this immediately. Does he feel like he needs somebody else to come in and maybe put a little bit more context to this? Or maybe he's just tired this evening. I don't know, okay? But I personally saw this. I thought it was very interesting. I pulled up the paperwork myself. I read through the entire thing. I made notes on absolutely everything. And I do think there's some very nuanced details that he missed. And I do think that if we get this all broken down page by page, I'm going to explain to you why this really is make or break. And I don't think this is necessarily the outright victory that it's being portrayed as. But I do think this is like an ultimatum being left, okay? They're basically saying, you ain't got nothing, show us what you got. And if they come back and show them exactly what they have, and it fills in all the gaps that Durk is calling out. He's cooked. It's over with, right? They've put together a puzzle, and there's a few pieces missing. They're saying if you ain't got these pieces, you ain't gonna finish this puzzle, and it's all or nothing. But if they come through and they say, "What do you think of this piece? What do you think of this piece?" and they slot it in these perfectly puzzled Durk-shaped sized holes, pause, it's going to be over with, all right? So let me break it down to you. I've got it here. I've broken down all of the pages and read through the whole thing. But basically, this is Durk Banks's reply in support of his motion to dismiss the entire indictment as a result of vagueness, or in the alternative for a bill of particulars. Now, basically, we're going to go full circle, and at the very end of this paperwork, it's basically going to make it very clear that they're asking the government, say, either dismiss the entire indictment or tell us what's missing. And if this is what I say, this is a Hail Mary pass, because if they actually come back with what's missing, he's cooked, it's very unlikely that they're just going to dismiss it. And there's maybe a small chance that they come back with something flimsy, but I'm just honestly not feeling like it's necessarily the biggest win for Durk. But look, when you get into the details, I'm going to break this down, okay? So look, here basically, what we're going to see on this page is Durk's lawyers are basically arguing that the indictment is vague because it doesn't say what the bounty that was on Quando Rondo's head is. Again, there's a lot of talk, and I think there's going to be a lot of reaction from Durk meat riders that are basically going to be like, look, see, like, there ain't no bounty, there's nothing, they ain't got nothing on him. No, it's not they ain't got nothing on him. They explained very clearly, we don't want to show you some of these things because it's going to compromise our witnesses. It's going to put people's families, it's going to put people's lives in danger. Okay. But Durk's given them an ultimatum, and they probably are going to have to come back. Okay. But what's interesting here is it basically says, okay, that Durk basically, they wanted to clarify very specific things, two specific things: the alleged bounty and the pervasive yet vague at the direction of accusations. They're saying the two main things that you need to prove that this was a murder for hire was the alleged bounty, what was the hiring, what was the pay, you know, if this was a LinkedIn job description, what's the pay and benefits looking like, okay? And then the at the direction of accusations. If you're going to say that you done the murder for hire and you hired me for a specific bounty, you got to tell me what the instructions were. Again, if you want to go back to the LinkedIn example, it's like, what was the job description? What was the instructions given? But basically, Durk's lawyers are saying, all right, they failed to do so. The opposition recites at great length details in the indictment that are irrelevant to the instant motion. It then states in a conclusory fashion. My bad, man. My bad. It states in a conclusory fashion that the discovery fills in any missing pieces on essential elements without explaining how or laying a record for the court to decide whether that's true. They've already gone back and forth about these points, but what basically the government said is like, it's very obvious. We've got all of these things from this witness. We've got other things. We don't need his iCloud. We've got other people's messages. We've got messages that Durk has probably sent to other people and been received. Everything, you've got everything you need. We don't need to prove anything else. They're basically clapping back and saying, you guys saying that you already gave us everything that we got in discovery is enough, is cap. Whether or not that's going to be accepted by the judge, whether or not the prosecution are going to clap back with more information, I don't know at this stage. But, okay, it's kind of a little bit spicy, okay? And basically, like, this idea that if you don't have these things, you're not going to be able to move forward. Like, the judge might actually clap back and say, nah, you guys have actually been given enough information. We do need to protect the information of the witnesses, and I'm going to allow it to continue to be vague. Now, what we end up seeing later on in line 10 is it basically, Durk's lawyers basically suggest that they're not allowing Durk to see the evidence that he's up against before trial, and that's not fair. It says the court should see through this smokescreen and decline to blindly take the government's word that the discovery puts Mr. Banks on constitutionally sufficient notice. Without the court's intervention, this vague indictment becomes a blank check that the government has written to itself, allowing Mr. Banks' prosecution on facts that were not presented to the grand jury that would take him by surprise at trial and are continually shifting as government cooperators change their stories. And they're basically going to go on to make some very harsh points to suggest that the cooperating witness keeps changing their story, but I'm going to explain why that is kind of a little bit of a stretch, and I think people are jumping the gun a little bit in my personal opine. Okay, so it goes on to explain over here in sort of line 20, okay, it basically says that the indictment doesn't state where, when, or why the bounty was placed, and this is essential to a murder for hire charge. It says at the outset, Okay, it's important to clarify what Mr. Banks is and is not arguing in this motion. In his motion, Mr. Banks takes issue with only two deficiencies in the indictment. The first is that the indictment fails to allege the essential facts with a reasonable particularity of time, place, and circumstances related to the alleged bounty that's an element of the murder for hire charge. It goes on to say in a footnote, it alleges only that at some point in the nearly 2-year time frame between November 6th, 2020 and August 22, 2022, the death of King Von and the murder of Savia Robinson, Mr. Banks made clear in coded language to defendant Wilson and co-conspirators 2, 4, and 5 and others that he would pay a bounty or monetary reward and pay money and lucrative music opportunities to anyone that took part in the killing of Taekwon Bowman. What's really dumb about this and why people are thinking this is such a gotcha is basically Durk's lawyers are saying, look, you haven't said when, where, or why this bounty was offered. Now, I don't know what that bounty was. They're saying it was money and lucrative music opportunities. Whether or not the government are going to clap back and say, there you go, Wednesday the 5th of November 2021, Durk group text the whole of OTF and said, I'm only giving a verse to people that are shooting shots at Quando Rondo. You cooked, you're done. But if the government can't actually come back with anything at all, at the very least, they're needing to come back with a witness that's going to explain to them, like, yo, I basically was told, and there's more information from a witness that I believe was redacted previously that's actually available in this. But if a confidential witness says, yo, look, Durk basically told the guys that, like, it's 20 bags, 20 grand if you can shoot shots at Quando, 50 if you kill him, and also you get a verse. That's not the best. That's not as good as a text message from Durk saying, I've got verses for anyone that tries to kill Quando. But it's still something, and it's still better than what a lot of people are kind of deriding and saying, like, yeah, they got nothing on him. Now, they got something on him. We just don't know what it is yet. And if the government clap back and provide the who, what, where, the time, place, and circumstances of this, they're basically saying it's so vague. It alleges only that at some point in the nearly 2-year time frame between November 6th and August 22nd, they might come back with 100 instances of Durk offering up money and verses and career opportunities and ranking the gang for killing Quando Rondo. You know, they're saying, at some point they might offer a whole bunch, they might offer one, but if they can't offer any, I would agree that this isn't necessarily a strong enough case to try. But I don't think that's going to be the case. Now, as we go on to the next page, what we end up seeing quite interestingly is basically Durk doesn't actually argue about any of the other vagueness in the case. And I feel like, I'm not going to lie, a lot of people were saying when the other guys in the case were trying to like sever their ties with Durk and have their cases separated, people were saying, oh, they're throwing Durk under the bus. Well, I'm not going to lie, like a little bit of me personally feels like maybe in a way this is kind of throwing the other guys under the bus, right? Because I mean, I don't want to go as far as to say it's telling on them because it's really not. But what I feel like it is doing is it's basically saying, here, look, on line 5, it says, Mr. Banks, all right. Oh, let me read the first line, actually. It says, the second part is it fails to allege the essential facts about the directions that Mr. Banks is alleged to have given in furtherance of counts 3 through 5. Directions that are his only alleged link to crimes carried out by others in his absence. It says alleged links to, it doesn't even say alleged links to alleged crimes. It says that's his only alleged links to crimes carried out by others in his absence. Kind of throwing those guys under the bus. I'm not going to lie, kind of throwing those guys under the bus. Saying, yeah, them guys, crimes carried out, he wasn't there. Them crimes that really happened. And it says Mr. Banks argues vagueness on these two topics only. And then it basically goes on to say Mr. Banks doesn't argue that the indictment is fatally vague in any other way. It's basically saying, with respect to the motive for Taekwon Bowman's murder, the date, time, circumstances of the stalking, gun possession, and the murder of Savia Robinson, what facility in interstate commerce was used, or the overt acts necessary to support a conspiracy charge, his lawyer's basically saying, yo, them boys all cooked. But Durk, don't put it on Durk. You can't prove that Durk's tied in, but it's looking bad. Kind of throwing them guys under the bus, if I'm completely honest with you. Now, from here, it basically goes on to essentially claim, like Durk's lawyers basically claim that the government wants to act like including those details kind of makes the murder for hire charge valid across the board. and they're kind of like arguing with this fact. So let me just break it down so you understand. It says, yet the government wants the court to find that the inclusion of details on these other matters renders the indictment valid across the board. So they're basically saying the government is trying to suggest that including these details that cook everybody else but Durk, they're trying to say that the indictment is valid across the board on Durk, but it's not. But still, you're still kind of throwing the other guys under the bus. And I get it. You got to throw guys under the bus sometimes. It's like, yeah, them guys is cooked, but murder, you got it. Murder for hire, whoa, you ain't got the evidence for that. That's what they're trying to do here. It says its opposition's introduction cites the indictment's robust allegations about the motive for the murder, details about how defendants stalked the murder victim's vehicle for hours leading up to the killing, including photos, and details about each defendant's role in the murder plot. Again, you're throwing them under the bus saying they're cooked. It says no mention of the robustness of the bounty or at direction of allegations. So he's saying, look, you got them guys banged to rights. You got pictures of them. You got stalking chart. Yeah, great, but come on, man, murder for hire on Durk. You ain't proving that, okay? And I would agree that that probably is currently the most flimsy part of the case, the hardest to prove, but they have brought these charges, and I feel like they are going to have more stuff to bring. Now, what ends up being said next is Durk's lawyers basically say that the government can't give up the bounty info because it's not there. And I think that might be a little bit of a reach. There's no mention of the robustness of the bounty or at direction of allegations. Government opposition at 1 over the next 4 pages. It regurgitates all of the indictment's allegations, including those that do not matter here in great detail. 1 to 4, of course, the government can cite no robust allegation, let alone a bare bones time, place, or circumstance about a bounty being offered or accepted, or the directions Mr. Banks is alleged to have given his purported co-conspirators. The reason for that omission is simple: the indictment contains none. Now, what I think is interesting is they're basically trying to say that, like, you know, the state are wrong for saying that the indictment has all of that stuff. We don't need to give you anything else. You've already been given everything at discovery. But you notice it doesn't say that, you know, it didn't happen or it's not possible. It's saying that the indictment doesn't contain it. And they're basically saying you can't try and add it in later on. You've got to give it to us before trial so we can prepare for it. And we're going to see more stuff kind of to that effect as it goes on. There's some more stuff that's kind of interesting later on, right? It goes on to kind of talk about some of the background about the bounty and what's necessary to kind of reach the constitutional burden of actually proving this happened. But what's interesting is it basically goes on to say, here the superseding indictment includes the elements of the offences, the date and place of the murder, the motive, participants, and actions they took leading up to, including the murder, but there's no missing factual allegation that precludes the finding of criminality. And later it argues that it's enough that the superseding indictment names with particularity the date and place of the murder, the participants, the motive, and 27 overt acts describing the actions leading up to the murder, as well as the murder itself. The indictment could contain 1,000 alleged overt acts, but if it's missing any essential facts giving rise to the charges, murder for hire, it fails nonetheless. Just like it names the date and place of the murder, it should name the date and place of the bounty offer. Now, this is probably one of the most effective arguments that I think Durk's lawyers have made to date. I feel like stuff like this is possibly why people are getting charged up, feeling like, yo, he's going to beat this, like he's got such a good chance. But again, it's like, that's all well and good saying you could have 1,000 overt acts, but if you don't have the date, time, and place of the bounty, then you can't put murder for hire charges on him. You've proved a bunch of random guys that have nothing to do with Durk did a murder, thrown him under the bus, but you haven't proved the bounty. That's all well and good until they hit you back with the information proving that the bounty happened, okay? It's all good just a week ago. If they clap back in the next couple of days and say, okay, this is the date he made the bounty and he said this guy was going to get on the song and there he is on Loyal Bros 2. Now, I'm just saying that's a little guess or it might have something to do with. But, like, you're going to be cooked. This sounds great now before the other side have had an opportunity to respond. But, like, if they clap back and they fill in all these gaps, he's going to be cooked, okay? So after this, it basically goes on to say that the bounty and the directions are the only link between Durk and the murder. I'm going to read this to you, and then I'm going to explain to you why this is wishful thinking, because there are actually other things, and people have tried to lie and say these aren't true when they are actually true. It says, The government's focus on non-pertinent details is a distraction. The presence of these details does not make up for the indictment's failure to provide a reasonable particularity of time, place, and circumstances where it matters, on the alleged bounty offer that's an essential element of the murder-for-hire charges, and on directions that are the only alleged link between Mr. Banks and the other charged with crimes. As to those two critical subject matters, the indictment is void of reasonable particularity of time, place, and circumstances. So let me break this down to you and explain to you why that actually is potentially nonsense. Because they're basically saying, look, all right, they've already thrown these guys under the bus. They've said, yeah, it's looking like they did that murder. You got all this evidence, this peak, but none of that's on Durk. They're saying that the bounty offer, you need to give time, place, and when, where, and how was the offer of the bounty offered. And they're basically saying that's the essential element for murder for hire. And on the directions, where are the directions? When, where, how did Durk tell the people to do stuff? That's the only alleged link between Durk and the other charged in the crimes. Do you think he maybe gave some directions when he was flying on a private jet with one of the guys that was organising the whole thing to LA randomly? And he just happened to be in LA while the hit was going down. A lot of people have got on my case because I said I thought it was a smoking gun that Durk was on a private jet to Los Angeles. I couldn't believe it. Right, when I saw the news of Quando screaming no when I saw the news of Quando screaming no, I knew immediately that's Little Durk's work, because I know you've been getting told to slide for Von. I would have never ever in a million years guessed at the time. Oh yeah, I bet Lil Durk was just in LA hanging out when this hit went down. I couldn't believe it. All right, and I've already addressed this in a previous video. People on Reddit talking about, oh no, that's not true. Durk wasn't in LA. Yes, he was. He flew in on a private jet. It is what it is. Now, look, there is original paperwork. I haven't got time to go and pull up other paperwork on this, just because I want to get really just focused on the new paperwork. But, like, everybody knows, okay, Lil Durk was with OTF Vonnie on the private jet on the same day the hitman traveled from Chicago to Cali. Durk made the journey, accompanied by Vonnie, who was a co-conspirator. He took decisive actions, purchasing ski masks for the intended shooters, using credit cards in Durk's names to pay for the hotel and accommodations for the rest. This sequence of events underscores the level of planning and cooperation. So when you lock cap and you say, oh, there's no bounty. Where are the directions? These are the only alleged link between Durk and the others charged. Well, yeah, the only alleged link, apart from the fact you guys are on a private jet going to LA together. Like, what did you chat about on the jet? What was going on the jet? Would Vonnie have been able to book a private jet on his own, on his salary of working as, well, I guess, what, like a personal assistant for OTF? Absolutely not. Cap. Okay, these guys in OTF, little bit of disrespect, but not really. But like these guys in OTF, nobody's getting private jet money other than Durk. Nobody's getting to California like that on a private jet other than Durk. I don't know if maybe guys in OTF do have a little bit of their own money, but if dudes are booking it on Durk's credit card, purchasing ski masks, what I mean. So everyone going, oh my God, Durk's going to beat this. I've been telling him, no disrespect, right? Except Nash, my guy. But it's like, when they're saying, oh, that's the only link between Durk and the others charged. No, it's not. The other link, you're on a jet together going to LA. What, just for a vacation and someone just got killed? It just so happened this went down. And what did you guys talk about? You're going to say Durk had no idea and then they linked up after the hit. And what, did they fly back on the jet as well? Did they chat about anything? Did they talk about, oh, the most popping hip-hop news story right now is Quando Rondo screaming no on the news? Like, that's a coincidence, and we just happen to be in LA. So yeah, I'm personally not buying it. I'm personally not buying this whole argument that, like, man, like, I'm Durk gonna beat it. Like, you know, there it is. There's the only alleged link. Cap. Sorry, I'm gonna stop doing that because it just feels good to just like feel like I can just back up nonsense with facts. But anyway, as this kind of goes on, basically it'll say outright that Durk has the right to know the time, place, and circumstances of the transaction that led to the murder for hire charge. And I actually agree. I feel like the state should have put this forward. Their argument was that we're trying to protect witnesses' anonymity. We want to protect the jury. We want to protect the family of the people that are cooperating. And that is valid. I personally believe in transparency of information generally, and I feel like they should clap back and just put everything that they have on the table. Let Durk have a very, like, this is me being throwing some bail to Durk. I think the state should give every bit of evidence that they have up, let everybody know, let everybody publicly know, so that there's no more danger to the community for these OTF members that have been terrorizing the community. So we all know what they're on, we all know how they're communicating, how they're moving, how they're behaving, how they function, so that we can be on the lookout for any more of this dangerous, murderous behavior that's allegedly been taking place. but also so that let's let Durk have a full picture of exactly what they've got on him so that he can create his defense. I think that's only fair as well, okay? And I do think that that's why this is kind of like a bit of a Hail Mary, because it's like, okay, if the government can actually, like, if the government don't clap back and give Durk some of these things he's asking for, then I'll throw my hands up and say, okay, maybe the case wasn't as strong as it looked to begin with. And that's just facts, okay? So, as I say, right, it says, even the government has to admit a defendant is entitled to know the time, place, and circumstances of a transaction giving rise to the charge. But the government nonetheless argues that the indictment here suffices because the information the defendant requests, the specific language defendant used in ordering a bounty and directing his co-conspirators are not operative or central facts to the case. Okay? And basically, the information sought is the words he used in offering a reward to the killers of his rival, or in giving directions to others, and not elements of the offense. The information the defendant seeks is merely the details of acts in furtherance of the conspiracy. And then it says, hang on a sec, it says that the bounty offer, however, is a necessary transaction giving rise to a murder for hire charge. And basically it says, you know, in prosecution for this charge, you need to basically receive a promise or agreement to pay something of a pecuniary value as consideration for murder. It's an essential element of the offense. And I actually agree with that. Okay. For this to be a murder for hire charge, you need to offer something in exchange. It's not a conspiracy to murder charge. It's a murder for hire charge. Now, I wonder if they just went on, oh, he booked a private jet so everybody could just get over there and do a murder, but he didn't offer them money in exchange for the murder. That might be conspiracy to murder, because you part of the conspiracy. You saying, yo, like, I'm one of your guys is like, yo, I would totally kill Quando Rondo, but I'm stuck in Chicago and I'm broke right now. And if you pipe up and say, well, look, I'm trying to see that happen, let me gas up the private jet because I can afford that, and I'm gonna take you. I'm gonna get you guys plane tickets. I'm gonna gas up the private jet, and a guy's gonna come meet me. We're all gonna fly to LA, and he's gonna hop off and go buy you guys ski masks. So I'm gonna kick back and watch the news. That's definitely a conspiracy, but yeah, that's fair. That might not necessarily constitute a murder for hire. But okay, but like, here's the thing, right? Here's the thing. It's like all the state have to do is clap back and go, yeah, sure, all right. DD got given a verse on Loyal Bros 2 in exchange for taking part in the hit. Boom, done, finished, over with. If you show me any text message, any tweet, any communication where Durk's basically saying, yo, get DD on Loyal Bros 2, man, because he really put in work with that Quando hit. Cooked, finished. And it's not that hard. People are like, what evidence have they got on Durk? Shit tons of evidence. And then like a piece of something like that, cooked, charbroiled, man. Okay, so what we end up seeing here on page 6, right? Basically, they're going to explain, because didn't Durk participate in the stalking or killing personally, his role being remote, okay, his role being remote, not actually being there and being involved in the murder, but remotely, you know, work from homing, if you will, on this murder for hire. They're saying it's only proven by the directions that he gave, which the government hasn't provided. Okay, so set aside the bounty. They're trying to say if Durk's involved in this, he needed to have directed people and told people what to do and called shots. And they're basically saying the government hasn't provided this. It can't be true. And once again, I just want to say the private jet, I think, is another smoking gun in this. Okay, because they're saying he didn't participate in the stalking or killing himself. Look, it says here. And because Mr. Banks did not himself stalk anybody, shoot anybody, possess a gun in furtherance of that stalking, the means and manner of his alleged remote participation, i.e. the directions he allegedly gave others, are essential to the case against him on counts 3, 4, 5. Those directions are in fact the only transactions giving rise to those charges as it relates to Mr. Banks. Mr. Banks is entitled to know the government's essential theory, the who, what, where, when, and how on these essential points. I wonder if one of the wheres is going to be on a private jet, and if the when is going to be during that private jet flight to LA, and the how is going to be enabled by private jet travel, and the who is going to be all the guys that were at the scene shooting at Quando Rondo, and the what being go kill Quando Rondo and slide for Von. I wonder, because if the state clap back with all that stuff filled in, it's over with. Okay, so after this, Durk's lawyers basically just make it very clear, okay, they want to get the who, what, when, where, and how, okay, and what's really interesting is they give a great example. They compare it to a wire fraud case, and I think this is a kind of helpful way of understanding it, but also I feel like it's kind of not really enough to really prove anything to me. So it says, the government obscures things when it argues that the words used themselves are not essential elements of the offense. Consider a charge that we more commonly see in federal court, wire fraud. Imagine an indictment that alleges the following. At some point between November 2020 and August of 2022, the defendant made material misrepresentations about investment opportunities to Wilson. and others in order to cause them to part with certain valuable possessions and or money. It would be beyond reasonable dispute that this language fails to put the defendant on notice of the charges against him. It does not enable him to prepare his defense, to assert that he never made statements at issue, that they were not false, and that they were not material, or that they were not designed to cause victims to part with money or property, among many other potential defenses. It does not protect against double jeopardy in a subsequent prosecution. The government would argue that these other statements form the basis for the new wire fraud charge. What is more, it obliterates the important function of the grand jury and permits the government to shift the theory as the case progresses. Okay, I also agree with this. I actually agree with this because I feel like what they're saying is basically, look, you were supposed to submit your evidence to the grand jury and you're kind of changing the evidence. You're not giving it up. Now the state is saying we're trying to protect the integrity of and safety of our witnesses and their families. Fair enough, but I think it's time for them to give up the information and let everybody know. I think the grand jury has probably seen stuff that's been redacted and protected from the public. Maybe they'll submit stuff and still redact it from the public. I think that would be a shame, but if that's what they got to do, that's what they got to do. But I do feel like, okay, fair enough. Durk, you do have a right to know exactly what the state think, where, when, and how the offer was made and the direction was made. But this isn't a wire fraud case. And, you know, the people's lives are at risk. Their families' lives are at risk. So I do feel like this is definitely different. But, you know, it all depends what the government are going to clap back with, okay? So now we get to page 7. And here they basically say that Durk doesn't actually want the actual details of the evidence. It says a bounty offer is essential to a murder for hire charge as a material misrepresentation is to a wire fraud charge. And so they basically say that that's essential to the prosecution. It says, to be clear, Mr. Banks is not requesting the details of the evidence the government will present at trial, i.e. the specifics, documents, texts, emails, cell site location info, or recordings the government will introduce, or the names of the witnesses who will testify in support of the government's theory. Yeah, no shit, because they're trying to protect them from being murdered by wild, out-of-control OTF members. But it basically says Durk just wants only the basic theory. It wants to know the theory behind it. It wants to know what's the theory, okay? What's the coded language? And they use another really good example later on this page as well, which I thought was fascinating. It says, Durk is only requesting the government's basic theory, without which he cannot adequately prepare for trial. By way of example, let's consider Mr. Banks' request for the particulars of the coded language he's alleged to have used to offer the bounty for Quando's murder. The issue of so-called coded language will loom large at this trial, with the government arguing the jury should assign certain meanings to facially ambiguous language, and the defense contesting those interpretations. Okay, and it says here the government even intends to call an expert who will testify in support of its interpretation of various terms such as get back and slide. Now I'm gonna have a field day with that stuff. But anyway, it says let's imagine that Mr. Banks is kept in the dark before trial about what coded language he allegedly used to offer the bounty. Then at trial, the following hypothetical, which is completely fictitious: a government witness testifies that Mr. Banks told him the eagle has landed, and in certain neighborhoods in Chicago, the eagle has landed means the speaker is offering a bounty for murder. Having heard these words and this interpretation for just the first time at trial, the defense will be unprepared to effectively cross-examine the witness about the meaning of these words. The defense will have done no research, conducted no investigation, lined up no witnesses to rebut that interpretation. That is the definition of trial by surprise, and it's a primary danger posed by a vague indictment. Once again, I do agree. I think if the government is saying it's coded language, what is the coded language? What were the words used so that they can debate it, right? And if it turns out that the eagle has landed is the type of thing that they've used, I'll soften up my position. I'm not going to lie. I'll put my hands up and say I'm wrong. I'll say maybe I was wrong to say that Durk was cooked. But if they come back and they say the coded language is it's time for get back, it's get back gang time, it's get back season. We're smoking on him anyway. Like, I want to see what that is. So I feel like it is only right that they request this get revealed. I think it would be right for the government to reveal this information. I think it's right for Durk to have a chance to prepare his defense at trial. So I do actually agree with that one. Now, later on here on page 8, it basically says that they need to say when and where things happen and gives another good example of why not having this will basically put them at a disadvantage in court, okay? And it talks all about trial by surprise. This is a danger posed by a vague indictment. You know, the defendant has not got a chance to actually properly look out for themselves. And here it kind of breaks down some backstory. It says, the same goes for the other information that Durk requests in a bill of particulars, including the date and location of the alleged bounty offer. The indictment lists no location of the alleged offer, and it alleges a nearly 2-year time frame in which the bounty offer could have occurred. If the defense hears for the first time at trial that the bounty offer was conveyed, for example, in a coffee shop in Chicago on January the 5th, 2021, they'll be scrambling to figure out whether Mr. Banks was even in Chicago in January 2021. There may be a witness who would have testified that Mr. Banks was actually in Atlanta at that time. But the defense will have been deprived of the opportunity to locate and call that witness. The Sixth Amendment guarantees Mr. Banks and all persons charged with crimes more notice than that. Once again, totally agree. I think that they need to make it very clear when this offer of a bounty was made. If they don't, I'm going to think that they got a flimsy argument, but I think it's likely they're going to clap back and they're going to drop a bombshell. I think the next paperwork from the government, they're going to go, all right, bet. Boom, 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 boom. Here's a bunch of offers. Here's a bunch of... If they don't, I'll throw my hands up and say, okay, the case was flimsy. But I was always under the understanding that they were going to have a lot of info in this one. So after this, okay, there's a bunch of other case law that's here that's not really that interesting, if I'm completely honest with you. But then on page 9, we're kind of getting to some of the final and really juicy bits. Section 3, it basically summarizes and says the info must not exist if the government haven't presented it when asked. And that is cap. It says, if that doubt-eliminating discovery existed, the government would certainly have cited it in its opposition. Now, that's not necessarily true because they're trying to protect the integrity of their witnesses and their safety. They've been trying to hold stuff, keep it close to their chest, because they said the OTF operates like the Mexican mafia and that they will ruthlessly kill anyone involved in this case and their families, all right? So they said, yeah, it does not. Indeed, nowhere does the discovery set forth anything resembling a fixed or coherent theory of the time, place, or circumstances of the bounty allegations or at the discretion of allegations. On the contrary, the discovery reveals government witnesses who are constantly changing their stories. Now, this is interesting because this is where they begin to accuse the snitch of lying, but I'm going to point out a very important detail here that kind of trashes this argument, in my opinion. In my humble, not trying to get sued, but also like keeping it very real with my audience, unlike a lot of other people commitment. Okay. It says, on the contrary, the discovery reveals government witnesses who are constantly changing their stories. PW1, for example, has asserted that there was no bounty at all. Now, what this bit is probably the juiciest thing in this video. They're going to clip this, you know what I'm saying? Make sure you don't skip this, all right? They're going to skip this. They are definitely going to skip this, right? It basically says, okay, they asserted there was no bounty at all and he did not agree to murder Quando Rondo for monetary gain and he did so under duress. Hold that thought. So they're saying that the witness, all right, the witness has asserted there was no bounty at all and he didn't agree to murder Quando Rondo for monetary gain. He did it under duress. He did it out of pressure, out of fear. He was under pressure. But as one might expect in a murder for hire prosecution predicated on the existence of a bounty, he rises to meet the occasion. They're saying that he's changing his story to fit in with what the charges are. And then it says in one government proffer session, PW1 recounted how Mr. Wilson allegedly stayed behind in Los Angeles after the other participants flew out in order to collect the bounty money for their distribution. PW1's story is, however, flatly contradicted by the objective evidence. The government's realization that PW1 lied here is likely why, between the first superseding indictment and the second superseding indictment, it deleted language alleging that Mr. Wilson paid out the bounty after Savia Robinson's homicide. It says, when the government witnesses are constantly changing their stories about crucial facts, as the discovery catalogues here, Mr. Banks' defense must take aim at a moving target. That's fundamentally unfair. Now, this is juicy as hell, because this is one of the first insights unredacted that we've had into what these witnesses are saying. But there's going to be more coming, but I'm just going to explain to you why there's actually some cap in here. There's some cap in these raps, okay? Because they're basically saying, okay, the government witness is constantly changing his story. He said that there was no bounty at all. He didn't agree to murder for monetary gain. He did so under duress. Now, here's what they're forgetting, because, again, a lot of meat riders are taking this information and they're basically saying, oh, the witnesses are lying. It's all cap. The whole thing's thrown out. No. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's certainly cap. Just because this one person who is now snitching said, I didn't, and also, I believe from the language here, it's basically saying that that confidential witness is one of the people that was there, the one unnamed person that was there shooting at Quando Rondo, because it says he didn't agree to murder him for monetary gain. He did so under duress. So he was involved in the murder, whoever this witness is. And what's really interesting is basically saying he did so under duress. Now, that's fine, Okay, if he's then saying later on, oh well, Mr. Wilson, had a bounty for distribution, this contradicted the objective evidence, and then basically like he did it under duress. But there's numerous people involved in this, so just because one person did it for duress, okay, doesn't mean another person didn't get paid. One person, well, I'm gonna keep this very real, okay. One person could do the hit for money. One person could do the hit because they love Durk. One person could do the hit because they basically are scared of Durk and that they need to toe the line. They're doing it under duress. They think something will happen to their family if they're not on board. Maybe Durk's threatened them. Maybe they know what's going on with I think they're saying it was the same confidential witness that was riding around with Booney Mo going to kill O-Block members because they weren't sliding for Von. So one person could do it for money, one person could do it under duress, one person could do it for the love, and another person could just do it out of straight bloodlust because they want to catch bodies. Because there was a whole bunch of people in that car. So just because, and again, this is just my opinion, all right? But just because this paperwork says, well, this person said there was no bounty at all right? Where did it say that? Again, we're going to need to see the quote, but I wonder whether Durk's lawyers are kind of twisting this and saying, well, if he said he didn't agree to murder Quando for money, then there's no bounty at all. Not necessarily true. Durk could have put up the bounty. Durk could have put up the bounty, and some people would like, bro, I ain't got to do that for bread. Like, I'm sliding for Von for free. I'm down, or I'm scared for my life. They could go and tell the feds afterwards, oh, I was scared for my life. But really, at the time, they was like, bro, you don't need to pay me. I'm trying to catch, bro, killing Quando Rondo. That's a famous hat. That's an expensive hat. I'll do that for free. None of that necessarily means just because, like, let's say 3 out of the 4 people didn't do it for money, they did it for the love, and one of the people got paid and it was a bounty, or they got paid in the form of a verse. Hey, Dee, jump on this track on Loyal Bros 2. Murder for hire, still murder for hire. So I don't think this is the reverse smoking gun that people think it is. I think it's actually possible that they're reaching here. That's possible. I'm not saying absolutely true. This is just my opinion. Absolutely my opinion. This is not fact. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not qualified legally. I am just a nerd with some glasses, basically doing some reading. So yeah, I think it's interesting. And now they're saying, oh well, Mr. Wilson allegedly stayed behind after the other participants flew out in order to collect the bounty money. Now that isn't necessarily true. Where's the proof of that? It says this is contradicted by the objective evidence. Okay, you're telling the state, oh, show us the evidence. Well, you show us the evidence then. Durk's team, show us the evidence. What are you saying? That everybody left and then Mr. Wilson, Dee stayed around to pay a bounty, but then they can prove that everybody had left the state? Are they saying that, oh, Durk left the state, but Dee was still there and the money wasn't distributed? If the reward for being part of this murder for hire is a verse on the new Durk album and it's musical opportunities, as the state have said, well, there ain't no bounty money for opportunity. There ain't no bounty money for distribution after this fact. So honestly, I feel like this looks really good, but I actually feel like substantially it's not as good as people are making it out to be. Now, after this, we basically see that Durk's lawyers are saying the government can't keep changing their story and picking the best version at trial. I sort of agree with this, but I also think that, like, I don't think the government is doing as bad as they're suggesting here. I don't think the government is picking whatever version of the story they want at trial. I think they're kind of just seeing some of the nonsense that Durk's lawyers are doing, and then they're basically just going, all right, forget it. I think they slipped up. They put the wrong evidence forward when they said, oh, Lil Durk used the audio of Quando screaming no in the song. That wasn't true. They had the wrong link. They had a fan-made link. But Durk is on the song ad-libbing talking about no. So it's true, but somebody was sloppy with their job and they left that out of the second version of the superseding indictment. The way that Durk's lawyers are painting it, it's like, oh, you're picking and choosing and you're not including things that you included because they're working out to not be true and then you're dropping them. I don't think that's really what's going on. And they do make a sort of very harsh explanation, and I think it is maybe not quite accurate entirely. But, you know, I do have agreed with some of the things that have been said here, but, like, generally I feel like this is slightly a reach. So it says the government should be clear with Mr. Banks and the court about its theory of prosecution. Which iteration of its witnesses' ever-changing stories will it stand behind at trial? Now, as I've just explained to you, I think that they're trying to frame this confidential witness as changing his story more than perhaps he really did. And I want to see their evidence as to why this is contradicted by the objective evidence. What evidence? They're saying, oh, the government's realization that PW1 lied here is likely why. Well, prove that he lied. You haven't proved that he lied, just like the state hasn't proved exactly when Durk put the hit out. So you kind of, it's the pot calling the kettle black a little bit, right? It says, which iteration of its witnesses' ever-changing stories will it stand behind at trial? It says, importantly, the government is not free to simply pick its favorite version. If the government told the grand jury, again, this scenario is completely fictitious, that the coded bounty offer was the Eagle Has Landed, made in a coffee shop in January 2021, and the grand jury indicted Durk based on that theory, the government can't switch it up simply because its witnesses' stories became more convincing over time. I don't think that's what the state are doing. But I think that is honestly, that's like a really convenient way to frame it. Now, later on here, they basically say if an indictment is this vague, it must be dismissed. If the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit. Under case law, when an indictment is as vague as this, it's defective and must be dismissed. In the words of the Ninth Circuit, if a bill of particulars were allowed to save an insufficient indictment, the role of a grand jury as an intervener would be circumvented. Rather, the assurance that a body of fellow citizens had asserted the facts and determined that an individual faced prosecution, the prosecutor would be in a position to second guess what actually happened within the grand jury and fill in the gaps with what he assumed transpired. The protection of a significant check on the power of the courts and prosecutors would thus be lost. For similar reasons, open file discovery cannot cure an invalid indictment. They're basically trying to say that, like, look, the prosecutors can't just come around and twist the evidence and add new things and drop earlier things after the grand jury have looked at the evidence and issued the indictment based on what that evidence is. But I feel like they're reaching and trying to make it look like that's what's happening, when really I think the government has been fairly consistent. They did slip up at one point with some of the evidence, but I feel like the government has actually been quite consistent, and they're just trying to protect their witnesses and their families. So I feel like the government... Let me read the last page, and I'll just tell you how I think this is going to go going forward, okay? This is the last page. This is the most explosive page, basically, right? It says both in its bill of particulars down the road, at trial, the government is not permitted to prosecute Mr. Banks on allegations other than those presented to and approved by the grand jury. That's not happening. The Constitution does not permit the government or its cooperators eager to say what they must try to save their own skins to fill in the gaps. I don't think that's what's happening. It says, for the reasons set forth in Mr. Banks' motion and above, defendant Durk Banks respectfully requests that the court dismiss the indictment against him as unconstitutionally vague. In the alternative, the court should order the government to produce the requested bill of particulars, comparing it with the grand jury transcripts in camera, in order to ensure that the government does not impermissibly shift its theory of prosecution. Now, this is all about to get juicy, because basically what this is saying is that the next paperwork, the next thing that the government submits, will either reveal all the details, all right, and then we will know for sure if Durk is truly cooked, and, they're going to have to cross-reference that to what was presented to the grand jury. Now, here's the thing. Just because the government are basically dropping some things that were presented to the grand jury, for example, this version of the song where you hear Quando screaming no, when in reality Durk is on the song screaming no, but they used the wrong song, they messed up, they used the wrong link. I don't think that's a problem. I think taking that away and just saying we presented all this stuff to a grand jury and then this was kind of screwed up, that we kind of did that wrong and we need to get this one right. That's not, I'm not a lawyer, but I don't feel like that's a huge deal. You're basically saying like, okay, well, look, this particular bit of evidence that we submitted that they approved isn't quite useful to us. We're just going to throw that in the trash right now. We're just going to keep going with all the stuff we had that is airtight. I don't see the problem with that. I feel like Durk's legal team, they're definitely making good moves. They're probably making the best of a bad situation with this. But again, if the government claps back and they say, well, the grand jury saw a bunch of transcripts from a conversation with a confidential witness where he made it very clear that I took part in the murder of the attempted murder on Quando Rondo that resulted in Lil Pab's death under duress because I was scared of what Durk was going to do, but other dudes were offered 50 grand. Didi was offered a verse on the album, and, basically, like, as far as I was aware, like Didi was basically gonna break bread off for everybody in In-N-Out Burger, and that's what ended up happening. Or everyone left in the end, so Didi ended up getting his verse. And again, it's like this idea that just like defendant Wilson was giving up the was divvying up the bounty, and this is untrue. Well, DeAndre Wilson ended up on the album with Durk, and if it's all well and good if he was promised, look, you're gonna get a verse on the album, everyone else is getting 10K, and nobody else got their 10K, but he got his verse on the album, bro, murder for hire, done. So I do think that this is massive. I think this is actually a real turning point. This is basically the moment where it's like Lil Durk's legal team could come back and just punch the state in the chest and just say like, yo, like, you're going to have to show us something now. And if the state clap back and they say, well, here you go, we presented all this to the grand jury, we've been knowing this stuff. This is when you offered it. Yeah, you was in the coffee shop in 2021 talking about the Eagle Has Landed, all right? And then Durk's team are going to have to scramble. But and I'll keep it very real, I always felt like Durk cooked in my soul. But at the same time, bro, I'll throw my hands up. If Durk beats this, or if the state can't come back with something solid, like to actually give the date and time and the particulars of this, Unless the only other Hail Mary would be that the judge steps in and says, no, you guys are doing too much. I'm with the state. We need to protect the witnesses' identities. I know what's going on, and I'm going to let it slide. That's going to be a really bad look for Durk. So there's three real scenarios that could come out of this. Two of them are very, very bad for Durk. One of them is like disproportionately OP good for Durk. And look, I'll just keep you guys updated on that. Okay, I know this was a long video, but I really wanted to just dig into this paperwork. Anytime new paperwork drops that I think is genuinely interesting, I will break it down in full detail. So I hope you found that interesting. I feel like I would have said before this, I would have said I was probably 90 to 95% sure that Durk was cooked. I would say after seeing this, I would say I'm probably like 85% sure that Durk's cooked. But I'm not going to lie. There was stuff in here that made me think like, okay, if the state don't clap back with something solid, I'm going to start thinking maybe they didn't have the case that I thought they did. But just as easily, they could clap back and go, all right, here's a whole bunch of evidence. Now what? And that would be devastating for Durk. So look, all right. People think I'm biased. No bias. I've just read you the whole thing. I've given you all of my opinions. I've told you what I liked, told you what I didn't like. I told you what I feels good. I'd say right now I'm putting the odds at 85% Durk's going to lose the case. But shoot, man. Like, if the state don't clap back, that might go down to 60. It might go down to 50. And before I might be at 40% if in the near future, okay? So thank you for watching. Thanks for all your support, man. I'm actually low-key super sleepy right now, so I need to just go and chill, go to bed. I'm going to get up early tomorrow. It's a very, very busy day for me today, but I'm very excited. I'm working on a crazy, crazy project on the main channel, right? Go and watch the full-length 6ix9ine video if you didn't, all right? And I know that maybe some of the content I've been putting out on the main channel hasn't quite hit the spot. I agree with you. I feel like I've not put my full effort, or if some cases I've not put any effort into some of the videos on the main channel, but that's all about to change, and trust me, this next thing I'm about to drop on the main channel, I might have to go into hiding after I drop it, because it's going to be absolutely insane, and I'll update you on that very soon. Just need probably a couple of weeks, and it's going to be out of control. I can't wait to show you what I'm working on, but it's actually wild. I'm actually scared. But anyway, I'll catch you guys in the next video. Thank you for watching this long breakdown. Love to the gang. Trap more nation. Shout out my trap disciples, man. I'll see you in the next video.